On 5 News tonight, the battle of Brexit takes to water. One of Britain's top businessmen loses his cool, and a terrible tragedy at a Disney resort. Leave and Remain campaigners take to boats to make their arguments, as George Osborne warns of tax rises and spending cuts, sparking a backlash in his own party. The former boss of BHS, Philip Green, gets tetchy as he's questioned over the running of the high street chain.
Do you mind not looking at me like that all the time? It's really disturbing.
And a 2-year-old boy is dragged into a lagoon by an alligator as his parents fight to save him. Also tonight, an extraordinary day at the Oscar Pistorius hearing. The athlete removes his prosthetic legs in court as his lawyers appeal for leniency. And Prince William, the cover star, breaking new ground by posing for a gay magazine. Good evening, welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Matt Barbett. There are some days when the EU referendum campaign seems in turn both dramatic and bizarre. On the one hand, both official camps were ranting about whether a vote to leave would create a £30 billion black hole, causing an emergency budget. Elsewhere, though, a very different argument, as their unofficial colleagues, including Nigel Farage and Bob Geldof, got into choppy waters by taking to the Thames to trade insults over fishing rights. Our political editor Andy Bell reports.
When you've covered every corner of the country, take to the water. The Leave campaign were on the Thames today to make the case for fishermen, but they were intercepted by a Remain fleet under Sir Bob Geldof.
You are no fisherman's friend.
And at the head of the Leave armada, Nigel Farage.
Multi-millionaires happy to see this industry go to the wall on a big boat, effectively laughing at working communities being destroyed. Absolutely disgusting.
Back on dry land, the Chancellor, flanked by a former Labour Chancellor, had a serious message. Vote to leave and the economy will be so damaged, we'll need an emergency budget to fix it.
Filling a £30 billion black hole would require sharp and difficult tax rises. The sorts of tax rises we could see include a 2p rise in the basic rate of income tax to 22%, a 3p rise in the higher rate to 43%, 5% increases in duties on alcohol and on fuel.
Well, that's infuriated 57 of his own MPs. And in the Commons today, the Labour leader, even though he's on the same side as the Chancellor on the referendum, well, he said he wouldn't back it either.
We would oppose any post-Brexit austerity budget, just as we have opposed any austerity budget put forward by this government.
As the two flotillas symbolically battled on the river outside, the official Vote Leave campaign set out how they would use Parliament to change the law.
A government will have to bring forward bills to end the supremacy of the European Court of Justice, to take back control of who can live and work in the UK, to make it possible for us to do our own trade deals, to put more money into the NHS, about £100 million a week. All of these things which we've begun to set out.
No one can doubt the two sides in this are on a collision course. By the end of next week, only one of them will still be afloat.
Yeah, Andy, fairly bizarre scenes on the Thames today. Of course, fishing is important, but I wonder if it's a bit of a red herring when it's that Brexit budget by George Osborne that's getting people really worked up.
Yes, that's certainly got everyone pretty steamed up today. I think the point is it's extremely unlikely that a budget would actually be presented of that kind by George Osborne. For a start, who knows who would end up being Chancellor if we have a vote to leave next week. All things could be up in the air, but also look at the opposition there from Jeremy Corbyn, look at the opposition coming from Conservative MPs. He simply wouldn't have the votes to get that sort of budget through the House of Commons. But I think what George Osborne was trying to do with presenting this as a budget was to try and say, look to people around the country, this would be the individual cost that as I see it, of that very damaging decision, as he would see it, to leave the EU, and trying to put it in terms of the taxes people would have to pay. But overall, clearly within his party, a lot of people very unhappy about this. They say that George Osborne's position would be untenable, but he thinks he has to go this far because the contest has got so close.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. The man who's faced more criticism than most for the collapse of high street store BHS has given his side of the story and vowed to sort out some of the mess. Sir Philip Green gave evidence to MPs today at a hearing that lasted for more than 5 hours. He apologised to the 11,000 staff and he said he's working on a solution to the pension crisis. Simon Vigar has more.
Avoiding the media scrum experienced by other recent witnesses, the former boss of BHS got straight to the apology.
Nothing is more sad than how this has ended. And I hope during the morning you'll hear there's certainly no intent at all on my part for anything to be like this, and it didn't need to be like this. And I just want to apologise to all the BHS people who've been involved in this.
He said he would take the blame, but it really wasn't his fault.
I could be a murderer, the way they're writing about me. This is really I can't deal with this. Well,
you have to take that.
That's a ridiculous statement. I'm sorry.
It's not ridiculous.
It is.
You decided.
And the oddest outburst of all?
Sir, do you mind not looking at me like that all the time? It's really disturbing. Sorry? No, you just want to stare at me. It's just uncomfortable, that's all.
I wasn't quite just staring at you, but I don't wish to make you uncomfortable.
Topshop tycoon Sir Philip Green is the bombastic businessman who is a friend of the stars. But his sale of the BHS business for £1 and its subsequent collapse and pensions crisis has landed him in hot water.
I was never involved at all, ever, in what they did, where they invested. I was not a part, never a beneficiary, didn't get involved, maybe should have done.
Sir Philip says he is working on a rescue plan for the pension fund. And what about Dominic Chappell, the buyer of BHS?
Unfortunately, we found the wrong guy.
His protests of innocence will be weighed by the committee.
I want to try and get back to work after this. I've been out of work for 4 weeks.
My last question.
Sir Philip Green is not out of work, although that is the prospect for 11,000 of his former staff. Simon Vigar, 5 News.
Now, police at a Disney resort in Florida say a 2-year-old boy who was dragged into the water by an alligator is almost certainly dead. The boy was snatched as he paddled by the shore of the Seven Seas Lagoon. His parents made desperate attempts to try to grab him. Jessica Omri has the story.
Search teams gather at the scene of an unexpected tragedy. A little boy has been snatched by an alligator and dragged into a lake. He was paddling in the shallow water on a family holiday in Disney World. His dad desperately tried to save him, but he'd already disappeared.
There were eyewitnesses here who certainly saw the child taken under the water, and it certainly is not survivable at this point for him to have been submerged for this period of time.
A huge recovery operation is underway. Helicopters and boats with sonar, along with more than 50 officers, are searching the area. But there's still no sign of the toddler. The boy was snatched from Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. He was playing in the water at the edge of the Seven Seas Lagoon, right outside the Grand Floridian Hotel, just one stop away from Magic Kingdom. The attack raises questions over safety at the world-famous destination.
Anytime they see an alligator or a complaint is called in that it can be taken out, and these alligators are not relocated. These alligators have to be euthanized because when they become a problem, that if you move them somewhere, you're just moving a problem. So Disney does everything by the book, and they have an amazing program for keeping track of and monitoring and then addressing any concerns that arise.
While officers insist attacks are rare, they admit they've caught and killed 5 alligators in their search of the lake. But they still haven't found the animal who snatched this little boy away from his family. Jessica Omri, 5 News.
The late broadcaster Sir Clement Freud has been accused by 2 women of abusing them while they were girls. Sir Clement died in 2009. One woman has told an ITV documentary he abused her for years from the late 1940s. The second woman says she was abused in the 70s and that he raped her when she turned 18. A 16-year-old boy has drowned after swimming under a waterfall in County Durham. Curtis Atherton was with a group of friends at High Force in Middleton in Teesdale yesterday evening when he got into difficulties. He was recovered from the water but died after being airlifted to hospital. Police in the French city of Lille have used tear gas and pepper spray to disperse football fans after trouble broke out for a second night in a row. English, Welsh and Russian supporters are all there for crucial Euro 2016 games, but it's not clear if any of them were involved. It followed a day when tighter security seemed to have an effect. From Lille, Peter Lane reports.
More trouble in Lille, a confusing picture tonight. A loud bang, possibly a stun grenade or firework, drew a rush of football fans and police used tear gas to clear the crowd. Local people, commuters, found themselves caught up in it, close to one of the main rail stations. A sudden change of scene here. Earlier, fans had gathered in local bars. Talk of a booze ban proved wrong. The restriction is on glass bottles. And officers took drinks away from people who roamed too far. There's a bigger police presence than we've seen up to now, some fans feeling a change in atmosphere.
Just feels a bit fragile, doesn't it? Yeah. That's what I would say. It's a little bit fragile.
It's just scary at the moment, but we're going to stay out in the outskirts and try and stay away from it all.
Yeah, to be fair, we've noticed a massive increase in, police presence.
I think the Welsh and English fans were sort of together, and even the Russians don't really fancy attacking.
Some Russian fans were stopped and searched in the city today. It follows 2 incidents of fighting reportedly started by Russian supporters. This scuffle in the early hours broken up by a policeman with pepper spray. Russian officers are in Lille working with the French and playing down concerns about hooligans.
We hope everything will be good.
But there is a problem here, isn't there, with a small group of Russian hooligans?
This is not a problem.
It's not a problem?
It's not a problem. Everything is under control.
The local security chief monitoring the city explained things in footballing terms. We won't let our guard down, he said. We've won the first half, but the second half remains. That's Wednesday into Thursday, when Russian and English fans cross paths. Whatever sparked the latest disturbance, these scenes tonight show how much of an ongoing challenge Lille faces.
Peter, is the atmosphere still tense there, or do you get a sense that the mood has shifted at all?
Well, Matt, as you can see from the unit of officers behind me, riot police are still out on the streets. They're stationed in teams like this on all of the main corners into the squares, but we can see for ourselves, can't we? Things have calmed down. They're in standby mode. The helmets are off. The shields are down. You might be able to make out some fans drinking outside a bar behind them, but they're standing there behaving themselves and drinking quietly. You can possibly hear the sound of singing echoing round the square here. The England and Wales fans are still here. They're in fine voice. Whatever happened earlier, however that started, it, as has often been the case, was over very quickly. And right now, people seem to be enjoying the evening, with police keeping an eye on things.
Peter, in Lille for us this evening, thanks very much indeed. Now, it's a survey that may confirm parents' fears. Almost all children have seen pornography by the time they are 14, and many of them now try to copy what they see. The report warns there's a real danger that young people are becoming desensitised to what they are watching. Catherine Jones has been speaking to one group of school pupils about their concerns.
2/3 of children our age have seen pornography.
Half of boys think it's realistic.
And 2/5 of girls do. And more than a third of 13 and 14-year-olds want to copy what they've seen.
It's the internet that's teaching our children about sex, according to the most extensive research so far on the impact of porn on teenagers. These 14 and 15-year-olds from Collingwood College in Surrey wish they were better equipped to deal with what they stumble across.
It'll be like someone sent you a text message and you just click on it and all of a sudden this video is just there.
No one wants to be the inexperienced one, I guess.
I think school could definitely cover it more because they just tend to cover like reproduction.
In sex education, we should be shown maybe safer and more in-depth videos about what happens during sex, because then people would be less interested in going off and finding it on their own.
Watching porn might make you feel pressured to buy an express ticket on the tryout train.
Information videos like this one can highlight the damaging impact of exposure to porn, but campaigners say parents must have the courage to raise the subject.
Children are growing up thinking that porn is real, and they're taking that into their sex and relationships. So parents really must have this conversation, otherwise their children will grow up with a warped sense of sex and relationships.
We're doing a pilot study on this
Collingwood College is trialling new lessons which focus on respect and gaining consent. But in every school, sex education has to fight for space in a packed curriculum.
There is a pressure to get academic qualifications, but I do think we need to spend more time making sure that our students are well-rounded, that they're confident, that they look after their bodies and they know their bodies belong to them.
This research shows many teenagers have come to believe pornography is a true representation of sex that they should try to emulate. Parents and schools both have a responsibility to try to correct that view. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
With me now in the studio is Helen Croydon, who's a journalist and writer on relationships and young people, and also Martin Daubney, columnist for The Telegraph and also a former editor of Loaded magazine. Good evening to you both. It's a sizable survey, this, of more than 1,000 children, but are you surprised by the results, Martin?
No, I'm completely accepting this is what I've been looking at for the last few years. I did a show for Channel 4, Porn on the Brain. I worked with 24 of the most heaviest porn users in the UK, and this is exactly the same. The Children's Commissioner has done surveys before. Age 10 is normal, but you know what we don't seem to be moving on to is what to do about this. You know, I go to schools myself. I've spoken with thousands of kids in schools across the UK this year, and the kids really want to be talked at about this. They are really open and intelligent and receptive, yet we are in a situation where the government's solution seems to be to control access rather than teaching them how to consume it responsibly.
Yeah, Helen, it's one thing for people like Martin who've already been trying to deal with this issue to not be surprised, but for others it's going to be a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
Yeah, I do. I think sex education needs to come into the modern era, you know, just like how we revolutionised it after the sexual revolution. I think now we need to revolutionise it again in light of the fact that there is just so much online access to porn. I mean, of course, porn's always been there, but the format that it's in now, it's so accessible. You know, it is a real issue and we have to confront it.
Is it? Sorry to interrupt. Is it an equal problem, Martin, between boys and girls, or is there a different situation for them both there? Because one of the stats that crops up is half of the boys asked think that pornography is a realistic depiction of sex.
Absolutely, there are different templates being set. All the work I've done shows me that the young girls, particularly the sort of 12, 13-year-old girls, are significantly more traumatised or bothered by this because a lot of the stuff that they are shown isn't particularly pleasant for them. So there's a sense of fear surrounding that they're expected to do this, whereas the boys are kind of learning how to have sex, if you like, from porn. It's like learning how to drive by watching The Fast and the Furious. They're being taught this kind of high-octane version of sex, which isn't like real sex. And so when they're getting into the real world, they're often quite underwhelmed or incapable of having real human relationships.
And they try and replicate it. I mean, that is the problem. A lot of the kids in the survey said that they wanted to replicate it. Now, see, I think the problem is they're going to be drawn to porn. Of course they are. When I was young, I remember being drawn to Just 17 magazine, it was when I was young, and we used to pore over the problem pages in the playground, which were relatively innocent, you know, the agony aunt comments, solely because they gave an insight into people's sex lives.
They were educational too.
They were educational, and so you know, we learnt from this, and that felt taboo, which now is relatively innocent. Yeah. But I think that's why they're going to be drawn into porn, because they think it's going to teach them.
Just briefly, at the same time, you've got parents who are trying to prolong their children's innocence and prolong their childhood, looking at schools to do something about it, and the schools are looking at the government to do something about it. Are politicians in the round doing enough here, Martin, briefly?
I think we're scared to tackle the porn problem, and we hope it will go away. We can't protect our children's innocence. That bubble can be popped age 10 and 11. So I hope today's survey acts as a wake-up call to the parents and the educators of Britain.
Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on 5 News Tonight. A bizarre day in court in South Africa as Oscar Pistorius removes his artificial legs. And Prince William becomes a cover model for the magazine he's posing for, which could surprise you. We'll be talking to his editor after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. There have been extraordinary scenes in court in South Africa as Oscar Pistorius removed his prosthetic legs to walk around on his stumps. The former Paralympic athlete looked unsteady and in tears as his defence team argued that he is a vulnerable man. Minnie Stevenson reports.
Oscar Pistorius going into court today as he always has done, walking and wearing a suit. As an Olympic athlete, he always strove to be seen as equal. But now his legal team will rely on his disability to defend him as they appeal for a lenient sentence.
You could just come around by
With his head in his hands, Pistorius has now changed into a T-shirt and shorts.
And I'm told he's very embarrassed, but he understands that it's important to do that. He's very, very embarrassed.
After his lawyer asked for permission, adding that the athlete was very embarrassed, Pistorius then removed his prosthetics.
If you can maybe just stand on my side where I can see him and talk to him.
As he struggled to walk to the front of the court. At one moment, having to be supported.
We have to see rationality now.
The athlete's lawyers say Pistorius was not wearing his prosthetics when he shot dead his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp through a toilet door in 2013. His legal team want to prove that Pistorius was too vulnerable to have killed his girlfriend intentionally, instead mistaking her for an intruder. It comes as Reeva's cousin described in court the scars left by the model's death, as she claims Reeva never loved Oscar.
I could see she was bubbly, I could see she was excited, and I could see there was a fondness for Oscar, but I did not see any love.
The hearing ends on Friday. Pistorius will be sentenced for Reeva's murder on the 6th of July, when the runner could face up to 15 years in prison. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
Earlier I spoke to Martin Cudahy, who's ABC News' South Africa correspondent and has covered the Pistorius case from the very beginning. I began by asking him to describe what it was like in court today.
In what can only be described as a stunt, Oscar Pistorius' counsel, Barry Roux, asked him to take off his prosthetics and walk through the court in front of Judge Thokozile Masipa in an effort to show just how vulnerable he really is when he's not using those prosthetic legs. But of course this was refuted by the state prosecutor, Gerrie Nel. He was at pains to point out that the real victim here is Reeva Steenkamp and that she does not have any such opportunity. She's not able to walk through court because of course she is deceased.
Yeah, could this taking off the prosthetics and walking around on his stumps backfire for Oscar Pistorius? Because his team said it showed how much of a broken man he is, both mentally and physically. When Gerrie Nel then said, well, we saw Barry Steenkamp yesterday and he really is a broken man, the father of Reeva Steenkamp.
Well, that's right. Barry Steenkamp gave a very emotional... he was in the witness stand for a long time, giving a very emotional testimony about just how his life has been ripped apart by the murder of his daughter. He, in fact, told the court that he's been self-harming since she died in an effort to try and feel her pain. So, as you say, Gerrie Nel was at great pains to point out that Oscar Pistorius is not the victim here. The victim isn't with us anymore, and it's only her family who can express their pain. To that end, another witness was called earlier today, Kim Martin, a cousin of Reeva Steenkamp. The two were very close, almost like sisters, she said. And she said that it wasn't just the Steenkamp family, but her family as well that has been torn apart by this tragedy.
Martin, just one final question. You've covered the case from start, well, to almost finish. It seems to outsiders that the South African justice system just continues to be a bit of a circus. Is that how it seems to you?
Well, a little bit. I mean, there have been some things happen, including today, that perhaps you wouldn't see in the UK or in Australia, for that matter. And there was a request made by Barry Steenkamp, so that's Reeva Steenkamp, yesterday. He asked that the photos from the crime scene be released to the public. And Gerrie Nel made a formal application to the court for those photos to be released. And Judge Thokozile Masipa, surprisingly to most of us sitting inside the court, granted that request. So those photos will be in the public domain in the next couple of days. And that's just the latest bizarre incident, the stunt with Oscar Pistorius walking around on his stumps. That's the second time we've seen that during this lengthy legal process. So it hasn't been a straightforward trial. It's been rather interesting, one might say.
No doubt. Martin, many thanks indeed.
Thank you.
We have seen remarkable pictures this week of people rallying together to stand up against homophobia after the Florida shootings at the weekend. And today, Prince William joined the fight, and he's not doing it quietly either. The Duke is making history as the first royal ever to grace the cover of a gay magazine, posing for Attitude. The message: no one should be bullied for their sexuality.
The Duke today made me feel like it was a kind of perfect end to a year where I've made a lot of positive changes in my life, and it's amazing to think that we could potentially be having a massive impact on the next generation of LGBT people.
You may have caught a glimpse of Matthew Todd, editor of Attitude, there at the start of that video, who's with me now. This is a fairly bold move for a royal, wouldn't you say, Matthew?
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, Princess Diana in 1987, I think, was the first public figure to shake hands with somebody with AIDS, and that was a global thing that went all over the world and changed the way people thought of people with HIV and AIDS. It was, I guess, a symbol of kind of affection towards the gay community to some degree. So it feels exciting and inspiring and hopefully positive. And I think in the UK, we're in quite a good place, but around the world in more conservative countries, I think this will cause ripples and hopefully it will be a strong positive message.
It's a strong photo as well. How long did it take for you to agree with the palace that and Prince William himself that he would do this?
Well, I wrote to him a few years ago when I'd written about mental health. I am a recovering alcoholic myself, and I realised that's because I grew up in a society which constantly invalidated me and told me that you're disgusting, you're evil, you may go to hell, you won't have a relationship, and there was bullying and so on, and no one to talk to about that. I've got a book out about it tomorrow. And I wrote to him about it and just to ask for help, because I've come across so many parents of children who've killed themselves or died from a drug overdose, whatever it may be, in horrible circumstances. And it seems that the media generally is afraid of talking about it. And as the future king, I hoped he would be concerned and would talk about it. And I'm so happy that he agreed to.
When he finally agreed, how quick did it all happen?
Very quickly. We got a phone call from Kensington Palace at the end of last year, and we were discussing what would be the best way to do it, how we would do it. We were going to do it in January, didn't work out then for timing reasons, and it's happened now, and I'm very grateful it has.
With it happening now, do you see it as timely, given what happened at the weekend in Orlando?
Well, we did this on the 12th of May. It went to press about a week ago. Obviously, we're all completely horrified by what's happened. I hope that it will be seen as a positive thing in light of this terrible tragedy, and maybe a small beacon of light that maybe we are moving overall in the right direction, hopefully. But I think it's really important to understand that violence like that, it doesn't come out of nowhere.
No.
It starts in schools, with bullying in schools, which often isn't dealt with. Sometimes we hear it from the media, sometimes we hear it from politicians and from religious figures. And so I think tackling it in schools, for the sake of everybody, we all want to get on, we all want to respect each other, that will make society a better place for all of us.
Matthew, many thanks indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
And that's just about it from us for now. Sian Welby's here with the weather next, and Sangeeta has updates throughout the evening. Bye for now.